So continuing with Holbein, he is really the master of the Renaissance portrait in England and internationally. Some art historians say that he dominated the period so much that there were hardly any followers and hardly any native English painters trying to go into his footsteps. One of the commissions that he got early on when he traveled to England was to paint a family portrait of Sir Thomas More with his children, with his large family. The portrait itself does not survive. It was destroyed in some fire, but we have quite a lot of sketches, quite a lot of studies. So drawings showing the members of the family of Thomas More and also other people from Tudor court and London and generally people. I give you a few examples here on the slide, but there are many more. They survived miraculously in very good condition, and I will give you the link to a very interesting talk on these portrait drawings by Holbein from a channel called Reading the Past. This is a YouTube channel run by a woman who apparently has a PhD after studying the Tudor period and generally English history. She has a very interesting channel, and sometimes she talks about art as well, and she has a very interesting 20-minute long talk about portrait drawings by Holbein. But even if you just look here, they are so lifelike. The way that the faces are captured, the way that their expressions are rendered. I've seen somewhere, I probably will not find it now, but I've seen somewhere kind of manipulations on the internet where somebody dressed these people in modern clothes, and you wouldn't really be surprised to see these faces in the street. They look so modern, they look so relatable, they look so lifelike. These are just like people. They are not particularly idealized. That's the point about Holbein. He does not idealize his subjects so much, but he tries to capture the essence of the sitter, the personality of the sitter. So we have these people really looking very lifelike and interesting, even if not all of them are conventionally beautiful. So let's now move on to the man himself, King Henry VIII. And I already mentioned that the way that we remember King Henry VIII now, I could just draw a few lines and you would know that this is supposed to be Henry VIII. This big rhombus for the body, two strong legs, very wide apart, the hands on his sides, the big strong head and the kind of tilted beret instead of the crown. Anyone, probably anyone who knows even a tiny little bit about British history would say this is King Henry VIII. This is supposed to be King Henry VIII. And this is the way that he was represented by Hans Holbein many times. He did full-length portraits and half-length portraits and just this kind of not much more than head and shoulders. And each time we have Henry, who was perhaps, especially in his later life, not the most attractive human being imaginable, looking very powerful. He's still probably not the most beautiful man ever, putting on weight and with his kind of reddish beard and his rather full face. But the way he holds himself in these paintings, the way he stands, he doesn't really need the regalia, he doesn't need the crown. You know this is the king. And especially for the courtiers, well, who are not yet so accustomed to seeing the likeness of the monarch, this could be intimidating. There are stories of the courtiers going into the room and being in the presence of one of Holbein's portraits of Henry VIII and getting terrified, just as they would if the king was present himself. Probably this full-length portrait is the most complete work that we can refer to now. I think it's in where is it? It's in Liverpool. So if you ever go to Liverpool, visit the city gallery. Most English cities have them, and they are free of charge, and you can see wonderful things there. And you will find this full-length portrait of King Henry VIII doing the Henry VIII pose, basically. So very strong, decisive stand, showing off his muscular legs, showing off the wealth and the power, and looking very masculine. We have some smaller scale portraits as well, but they generally follow the same principle. The king looking manly and strong. The masterpiece of this kind of political propaganda, because this is nothing short of political propaganda, really, extremely effective on top of that, would be the mural showing King Henry VIII with his father, his mother, and his wife. You might ask which wife? The favorite one, of course, Jane Seymour, the one who gave him the son and died 2 weeks later. So still, if Henry wanted to have a family portrait, he would still include Jane Seymour even long time after she died, because she was the perfect one. She just died, you know. She never betrayed him. She gave him the son, and then she moved out of the picture to become idealized. So we have this template of Henry VIII. We only know the copy from the 17th century because the mural itself was destroyed together with the entire Palace of Whitehall in central London in the later period. So during the, I think it was during the fire of London, this palace was finally destroyed. Only one room survived, like a separate hall, let's say, but we will talk about it next week. So this mural showed the royal family, or the lineage really, of the royal family, with the central big inscription addressed to Henry's son, Edward, and his successor later on, urging him to be worthy of his great father and grandfather. And especially if you look at Henry VIII, this is the classic Holbein pose that was later reproduced in many versions by Holbein himself and by anyone who wanted to depict Henry VIII. You cannot really imagine Henry VIII looking in a different way, with one exception: the TV series The Tudors. We have a significantly slimmer Henry VIII, and there were many voices of criticism. So let's now look at those women of the court. We have some portraits by usually also foreign artists, Flemish artists. Some of them are English, like this one's probably English, Michael Sitow. An early portrait of Catherine of Aragon when she was still young and pretty. Later, it looks like she put on some weight as well, because another portrait, like 23 years later, shows her. But it's just the face and the shoulders, but we can assume that she put on some weight. Unfortunately, perhaps for us, Holbein did not paint Anne Boleyn, so the first executed wife, was painted by other artists. We are not really sure whether any of these likenesses is very good or very lifelike, but here we have, for example, Lucas Hornbout, the same man who painted Catherine of Aragon, also painted Anne Boleyn. Holbein, however, painted two of those royal ladies, wife number 3 and wife number 4. So Jane Seymour, the one who died, he probably met her and he painted her on the mural, but also on this surviving portrait of her. And I've heard some art historians and art critics talking about this portrait, praising the way that, especially again, the sumptuous costume, including this classic Tudor gable bonnet, is portrayed. But the woman herself looks very timid, perhaps not really conventionally beautiful, but you have to remember that the ideals of beauty change in time as well. But if Holbein tried to portray her, capturing her personality, she looks like a very shy, modest person, but probably someone who can get around quite well. Her eyes are small but rather intense in their looks. And I've heard someone or read comparing her to a jewel. So she's like a jewel, really, to be decoration of Henry's court. And as I said, even long after she died, when Henry wanted a family portrait like this one, I couldn't find the complete thing. So there's one with just a central part showing King Henry, his wife, of course, Jane Seymour, and his son Edward, and the full version with 2 daughters from the first 2 wives added at the sides. This is the moment when Henry kind of tried to reconcile with all his children. He accepted his daughter Mary and Elizabeth to the court, so the children were raised together, even though they grew up completely differently. This was mainly due to the religious education they received from their attendants, from their parts of the court. So after Jane Seymour died, Henry wanted a new wife. He sent Holbein to paint beautiful noblewomen of Europe, so Henry would choose one to marry. And the first choice was this woman, the woman never to be Queen of England. Her name was Christina of Denmark, and she was a very young widow. She's wearing black clothes because she is in mourning for her first husband, but she is still in her early 20s, or even not yet 20. She was anyway a very young woman, but still with an independent means of her own because of her status as the widow. So Holbein painted this beautiful portrait, full-scale portrait of her, one of the best female portraits that he ever did. King Henry loved it. He proposed marriage to Duchess Christina of Milan, and she declined. According to the legend, she said something that she only has one head and she cannot afford to lose it, referring, of course, to the fate of Anne Boleyn. But she declined. She was the one that got away. But then, of course, Holbein produced another beautiful female portrait of this noble lady, Anne of Cleves. So again, a lady looking very noble and perhaps a bit modest, dressed in a sumptuous gown and headdress. And King Henry said, yes, I will marry her. And she agreed, and all the ceremonies and documents and everything was prepared. So they were as good as married when she arrived in England, and the only thing to do was to consummate the marriage with the king. And he didn't like her. Again, this is one of the mysteries of the Tudor court. Why didn't King Henry like Anne of Cleves? There are all kinds of stories. He suggested he didn't like her looks, but I don't think he would look so different from the portrait. There are some stories that he tried to surprise her and to play a kind of courtly love game with her, so to court her incognito and make her fall in love, make her fall in love with him. And it didn't work. She did not recognize him, and she just thought he was some pushy courtier, and he didn't like her, so he divorced her. She was the wife number 4 who was quickly divorced, and she didn't suffer that much. She got a lot of wealth, she got her independent court, and they even became friendly later on. He called her his sister, and she was the one to survive the longest of the king and all his other wives. Wife number 5, Catherine Howard, the young, flirty girl who quickly got executed because she cheated on the king. Probably this was true, but yeah, here we have her. Yeah, and this is one of the portraits that are attributed to Holbein. So maybe he painted 3 wives after all. He did not paint the last one because he fell out of favor after the Anne of Cleves affair. So this Catherine Howard thing was perhaps a way to try to get back into the king's favor. It didn't work. So the last queen was Catherine Parr, an English noblewoman, and she survived. Henry died relatively early in his 50s, but his health was very bad at that time. So what we have here to remember is Hans Holbein and his portraits of the king, of his courtiers, and of his wives. But there is one more portrait of the courtiers, but this time foreign members of Henry's court, that is really the masterpiece of Hans Holbein. If you ever go to the National Gallery in London, step in. You don't have to pay, so you can just step in and see this one painting and look at all the wonderful details that are hidden within it. So this can be really read like a riddle. Everything is meaningful. Everything tells a story of the 2 men who were, one of them was an ambassador, the other one was a bishop. Both of them very young French courtiers in their 20s. There are actually some inscriptions on the painting saying how old they are, and we have the portrait of the Renaissance, really. The portrait of the Renaissance. If you look at the table in the middle, you have all kinds of instruments of science on the top shelf, and the instruments of pleasure and the world on the bottom shelf. So it's like the heaven and the earth, the orb, the globe of heaven on the top shelf, the globe of the earth on the bottom shelf. Some navigational instruments on the top shelf, musical instruments and musical notations on the bottom shelf. We have all these things. We have like a comparison of an active life and a contemplative life. As I said, one of them is a courtier, a politician, a diplomat. The other one is a man of the church, the Catholic Church, of course. So the man leading a spiritual life. So we have all kinds of interesting stories here. We don't have time really to get into great details, like just a little bit. There are little signals that something is wrong with the world. Like one string of the lute, this musical instrument, is broken. And the music, the hymn that is visible in the open book, and it's so well painted you can actually read the notes. It's one of the hymns written by Martin Luther, the great reformer of the church. But of course, this means discord. This means some sort of troubles in the church itself. And there are two things that are really, really masterful here. The first one is the strange shape on the floor. At first, you do not notice that, or you think it's perhaps part of the floor, or some sort of mistake, or what is it? And only if you look at it from a very sharp angle, from just one particular point, you can see it is a human skull, scaled so that you can only see it from one vantage point. This is called anamorphosis. So a painting that is not to be seen from the front, but from the side. Here we have another example of the young Edward VI, the son of Henry VIII. Also a kind of portrait, but in anamorphosis. So if you see it straight, you see this kind of blurred image. You can see it's a human face, but it doesn't really look realistic. But if you see it from extremely sharp angle, this is a good likeness of the young king. So we have this image, which is a mystery, and lots and lots have been lots of works have been written about the meaning of it. Is it a memento mori? Is it the kind of vanitas? So the kind of like everything in the world is passing. Remember, you will die. It's not important. It's the salvation of the soul that is really important. Also, if you look at the extreme left-hand side of the painting, behind this green curtain, there is a half-hidden crucifix. If you know it's there, you will find it. It's the figure of Jesus on the cross. Does it mean that Holbein was secretly a Catholic? Some scholars say that's the case. Does it express the religious opinions of the sitters? Of course, they were French, and maybe they asked for this kind of symbolic game. And part of the Renaissance, part of the humanism, is really the interest in science, in mysteries. They could be physical mysteries, they could be spiritual mysteries, and this is really the great time of alchemy and astrology and all those now, which we would call pseudosciences, but they are really proto-sciences. They will give rise later on to more rational knowledge, but in the Renaissance they are part of the, let's say, general scope of knowledge. So this spiritual dimension is still very important. So here we have the masterpiece of Hans Holbein. We can talk about it during the live meeting if you want. I can find you some videos with, I know, the curator of the National Gallery talking about this painting for an hour. So it really is so interesting that you could talk about it for a long, long time. Just to move on, we have a few more paintings. This is, the next one is a portrait in the style of Holbein by an English painter called John Betts. He may have been an assistant or perhaps a student of Holbein, and here we have a similar style in portraiture with a lot of attention paid to the surface, to the textures. So the texture of the fur, the texture of the clothes, the texture of the beard of this sitter, and also his personality, his likeness. This is a psychological portrait, really, in the style of Holbein, perhaps not as masterful as Holbein's painting, but still very good. I wouldn't call John Betts the first English painter. I reserve this right for another artist in the first half of the 18th century. But we start having native talent, learning from those foreign masters. But the foreign masters continue. Here we have another Italian, Girolamo da Treviso, who was commissioned this very Protestant image, the religious image, really for the Protestant church, the Pope stoned by the four evangelists. So we have the figure of the Pope lying on the ground, about to be stoned to death by the symbolic depictions of the four evangelists. So, of course, according to the Protestant doctrine, the Bible is more important than the church, than the ritual of the church, and especially the church of the Pope in Rome. So here we have it. We start having religious art depicting Protestant themes. Then, after the death of young Edward VI, everything reverts very, very sharply back to Catholicism with Mary I, Mary Tudor, called Bloody Mary for a reason. And here we have two portraits of her by another imported artist, Hans Elworth. She was not really interested in the arts. She was interested in crushing Protestantism. And then she died. She probably had cancer. She married a Spanish king. So this was the reason of the Armada. The Armada was launched by the sad widower of Queen Mary, trying to take his inheritance from Elizabeth. And then we start the long and glorious story of the portraits of Queen Elizabeth I. So another great, wonderful monarch, even though the Victorians only grumbled that she was a woman who refused to marry and she was vain or whatever. I'm not sure she was that vain, but maybe she was. Anyway, her portraits are just as interesting as portraits of Henry VIII, but they are completely different. Absolutely different. They couldn't be more different. This is just one generation and you have a completely different style. We do not really have one favorite artist, perhaps with one exception about whom we'll talk in a little while because he's quite unusual. But many of the portraits of Queen Elizabeth as a young woman are by anonymous artists, and many are by all kinds of foreign artists invited to paint portraits of the Queen. And if this working relation between Henry VIII and Hans Holbein was all about likeness, was all about similarity, the portraits of Queen Elizabeth do not care about similarity at all. They will be all about the symbols. And we continue in a moment.